What's up, gamers? Welcome to episode 42 of the Business Casual Gamers podcast. This is the show focused on gamers with jobs, families who have things to do in real life. My name is Chris Smoke, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, Mr. Aaron Connick. How are you, sir?
I am great, Chris.
Very good, very good. And in this episode, we're going to talk about business casual gamers. Not just us, but you as well, versus hard games.
I'm ready to be pwned.
Oh, it's gonna be great. Hard games are fun things to talk about, and also I'll be talking about Nier Automata at the end of this show. Finally got around to it, and we really have some fun things to say about that show, but with that game. But before we get into it, let's talk a little bit about how to find us. You can find everything there is to know about our show on our website at businesscasualgamers.com. You can find us at BIS Casual Gamers on Twitter. Please take the time to follow us. You can see anything that we do on our personal accounts, as well as through that BIS Casual Gamers account. That's a great way to keep in touch with us. You can also find us on YouTube. So these shows are not only in audio form, you can find us in video form as well on YouTube, as well as some other things. We do have some stuff coming down the line. I know it takes a little bit of time to get that stuff out. But while you're listening to us, please take the time to rate us on iTunes or Google Play or any Stitcher, any of the places you find us. We really do appreciate that. And now, let's get to that awesome topic, Aaron. So here we have a little bit of a topic on hard games. We kind of struggled on how to really define hard games. But for us, that's the audience, that's us as business casual gamers, we have a question for you. Do you even game, Brah?
Brah, I mean, really?
Brah? What? Do you even get, I mean, really? Yeah.
Maybe. I mean, we do a podcast on it, so I mean, that's got to count for something, right? We occasionally assign each other games.
And when we play games, we play them pretty poor. Aaron, why don't you intro this subject for us here?
So there was a time in our life, this is especially relevant given that we're coming out of the summer season. People are going back to school. But there was a time in our lives where we could devote an entire summer vacation to beating that especially challenging game in our lives.
Silver Surfer.
Now, exactly. Now, if we wanted to climb that mountain, in many cases, it was just a matter of time, of having the sheer willpower and tenacity to stick with the game long enough to master it, to see that the end screen or whatever that milestone was. But nowadays, the business casual gamer that we have so often defined pretty much has everything but time in their lives.
Exactly.
And so achieving mastery over some of these games may be one of the most difficult things as a gamer. And so on today's show, we really wanted to explore our relationship with notoriously hard games in all forms, how we feel about them, do we play them anymore, and can we even enjoy them? Is there a way, if you acknowledge that maybe you can't play it the same way you used to, is there a way to still get enjoyment out of these games? So the way we're going to kind of approach this show is we're going to talk about a few different genres, if you will, and step our way through. I also want to give a quick shout out to Anthony Pearson, who's one of our listeners who actually gave some of the inspiration for this show. And one of the things he first brought up was, bullet hell games. It was funny. He gave me. He loaned me Castle of Shikigami 3 for the Wii, and it was one of these games where there's lots of hard bullet hell side-scrolling shooters, and it was one where we kind of talked about, are we able to still play these anymore? So, Chris, I know that you're a big fan, much like I am. You can appreciate the genre. Games from Treasure, games from Cave, and we'll get into some of those. Two of my favorites in the genre, Ikaruga and Mushihime-sama, two amazing games. When you watch the YouTube videos, you are just marveling at the skill level it takes for top players. And even though I have owned both of these games, I look at them and I just say, I'm never going to have the time. I'm just never going to get that good. There is no conceivable point in my life, if I quit my job, banish my family to the other side of the universe, lock the front door, throw away the key, I still am. I question my ability to make it to the end these days, Chris. What are your thoughts on this?
No, I'm the exact opposite way. So I'd like to thank my friend Dave. My friend Dave, when I was just started, working in my professional career. Dave and I worked together. We actually shared an office for a while, and he introduced me to a lot of the cave shooters. The Donpachis, the Escaludas, the Mushihime-samas, those kinds of games that are just, and he just ingrained it. No, here's the thing. He went out and he was a crazy, an awesome fan of Japanese arcade games and shmups, and so he went out and got a Japanese arcade cab, and so a lot of these games I played on a Japanese arcade cab, which I do think the ambiance helps a lot. But one of the things that after playing those games a lot, people get kind of freaked out about the bullet hell games. They look at it and they think, 99.99% of the screen is covered with
death.
pink death.
It's just death.
They don't necessarily realize that, of course, your hitbox in those games, certainly some of the cave shooters, is like 2 pixels wide, right? So your hitbox is really small, and that helps a lot. And the game, in fact, is designed to help to be played that way. But what I ended up coming up with was, this wasn't a stressful event for me. This is like a Zen moment. So if you ever seen when there's like a moment in the Old School movie where they're in a debate and Will Ferrell goes into this trance where he just starts spitting out this crazy historical knowledge. It's kind of like that, where when I sit in front of these games, for me, I don't get worked up. I just get calm washes over me, and I sit there and I just make small little movements through the little the bullets and all that, and I slowly end up getting through it. Now the thing about it is, we talked a little while ago about whether we play games to finish them. I'll tell you, for these types of games, I never play them to finish them.
Sure.
It's all about the journey. It's all about fun. It's kind of like you're in an arcade. You put in a quarter or whatever, you get 1 credit. You play for a while. When you die or when your time's up, you walk away. And that's kind of how I approach these kinds of games. I absolutely love them. I will, in fact, just even talking about these games has made me want to go out and try and play them some more, because they are incredibly fun. It's fun to see a game that is so outwardly offensive in a sense. Like, this game is basically like, it's impossible for you to beat me. Just try. But when you actually get into it and actually start playing the game, you realize that it really isn't kind of like some of those Kaizo Mario kinds of games we played that actually do get close to impossible, and it's less memorization and more of a way to I'd say to kind of just you learn how to react to some of these things, and you learn some of the patterns, but it's not really memorization, it's more just playing.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's valid. To me, I agree. I think Ikaruga is the last one I put a decent amount of time into. And I couldn't beat it, and I didn't have the commitment to really stay with it all the way through. But it's a beautiful game. It is something it's just fun to be a part of, even when you are on lower difficulty levels and you don't feel like you're getting complete mastery. I do appreciate a lot of those games, even though I don't really seek a lot of new ones out. What I have found, and the game that really brought me back into the genre, or at least thinking about what could be possible, was Pixel Junk Side Scroller. So it's not like I don't talk enough about Pixel Junk games, but for those of you who haven't played it, the one thing that it introduced, or at least was new to me at the time, was the fact that most side-scrolling games, if you take one hit, you're dead. Now, maybe you have multiple lives, maybe you have continues, you can get back in the game, but there's still this kind of feeling where I am going to inevitably die if I make one small misstep. Whereas that game introduced this concept where you'd take a hit, but as long as you could get your ship to water, it would basically cool your ship off and you'd be back in the fight. And so it just kind of gave you this second chance to say, oh, if I just missed that one stray bullet, or if I made one wrong move, you had this almost mini game where you were scrambling to find water, and not every screen had it, so it wasn't something where it was just easy to always get back in. Sometimes you had to survive for a minute or so to get back, but I always felt like you'd play old games like you mentioned, or like Gradius or something like that, where you'd get all the weapon power-ups and then you just miss something, you'd look away for a second and then you'd start over and you'd have none of the power-ups and you'd just be frustrated. But I thought that was a really innovative way to still be challenging. It's a very challenging game, but allow you that second chance. Another game that's coming out that I think we actually will probably do as a future assignment, and I'd like to play on our YouTube channel because I think it'll be fun to watch. It's a game called Cinemora EX. I know this was a game that was previously released, but the EX version comes out for PS4. They've really up-res the graphics. You've got 2-player co-op, and the cool mechanic that they seem to have added is that if you take hits, there is a timer that's always running down. And as long as your timer is above 0, you still play. And so every time you take a hit, it knocks time off the timer. But so at that point, when you shoot something, it puts time back on. And so basically at that point, you're having this exact same scramble where you're like, okay, I need to shoot something. I need to get... And I feel like that's something that I could get behind a little bit more because it doesn't require the exact same amount of precision that, you mentioned on Mushihime-sama. It has this concept of you unleash the special attack, and it kind of has that same, all right, if I'm getting swarmed, I hit the special button and it gives me some invincibility frames to have an out. But I do feel like there is kind of a medium that can be introduced into the genre to say, hey, people still like this genre, but maybe not everybody's at a skill level where they can just achieve that level of mastery that's needed that you see on a lot of the YouTube playthroughs.
But we, with our YouTube playthrough that will be forthcoming when it comes out, we won't need any of that. We're just gonna
win
this. One credit clear.
I mean, we did it on Streets of Rage too, so it's possible.
In theory, yes,
it's possible.
In theory,
but another thing that I think is helpful. This is a genre where I feel like co-op can really add a lot. So I mentioned Castle of Shikigami 3. The fact that you had different playable characters with different shot selections, things like that. I had a lot of fun just mixing and matching character teams and seeing, okay, well, how does this play different? How do these characters play together? And even though I didn't feel like I was good at the game at all, and I didn't beat the game even on co-op, there was a lot of fun getting playthroughs with different characters, seeing how far you could make it, just experimenting with, okay, what can you do? Where do we position ourselves on the screen? So I do think this is an area where co-op can add a lot to the game that otherwise, couch co-op, as we've talked about, is kind of sometimes a rarity, but this is a genre where it works.
Well, yeah, and I think that, one of the things that makes these games, this particular bullet hell scenario, maybe a little bit more palatable for most gamers who are not hardcore. So we talked about some of these shooters, these shmups we're kind of discussing, are very traditional, purposely designed shmups, right? Yeah, maybe they may have a mechanic where you have bombs, like you said, and when you get hit, they throw a bomb, and when you get hit and you have no more bombs, you die. They may have that, but you think about like the black and white kind of a component where black absorbs black, takes no damage, and black gets hurt by white, and vice versa. That kind of mechanic, the time stealing kind of mechanic, or the time addition subtraction mechanic, those kinds of mechanics I think can make the games more interesting and more palatable to a lot of folks because there's actually more of a puzzle mechanic in a sense there, right? Where you can look at it and you can say, oh, you're right. Like, so, for example, Cinemora is a perfect example. All I need to do is just keep hitting more things, then I take damage, and in theory, I'm going to come out on top in the end here. And I'm sure, it may not be that simple, but, I think that is, when you die, it's less of a, man, this is freaking impossible. The screen is 99% bullets, and more of a, oh, you know what? I was like one kill away from that hit not mattering to me anymore. Right. And I think that's a... Because when I talk to people who do not traditionally play shmups, like these kind of hard ones, there are the hardcore fans, but there are many people who don't, but that like Ikaruga, they really like it. They enjoy its back and forth. They know it's harder than Snot, right? But they also enjoy playing it. I think that's what we saw in the early and mid 2000s. I think when Donpachi and all these other ones were coming out, was that people would play these kinds of games that have interesting mechanics. It would interest them in more of these kinds of games, and shmups became very popular for a while there.
And I think that obviously this is a particular genre where it's on the decline, right? It's been declining for a decade at least, and some of the old franchises have kind of concluded. A lot of the games that are coming back. So I know Raiden is releasing a new game soon. Cinemora, this is a re-release. But you're seeing a lot of value price titles that are saying, hey, we can do a lot now with 1080p graphics. We can make it look better. We can have online. There are some things that we can add that old games never really had. And so I think there can be casual fun more so now than there used to be. And I think there is an appreciation for, if we're going to bring people back in the genre, we need to have something, at least kind of that back of the box feature to get some casual audience back. But it certainly is something where they know if we want to sell copies, our target audience is we have to appease the hardcore gamer. So it is something where I think this is a genre where I tend to do a lot of research before I commit myself to playing a game, because I do know that some of them, they're just going to be over my head, and if there's not a mechanic that speaks to me, I'm probably just going to beat my head against the wall and not have a lot of fun.
Yeah, and you're right. And I'd love to hear what the audience has to say about this one, because I do think that because of the arcadiness of this particular genre, it's not the game itself might last 25 minutes if you play through the entire thing, and it depends obviously, but it is certainly a very short-lived kind of experience in many cases, and that I think lends itself to that feeling that I described before, where you feel like you can just walk away from it. Now, let's move on to the next one here.
Yeah.
And this is one that I think is almost just completely opposed to the shmup idea. And this is more of the character action piece. So these are your Dark Souls, your Bloodborns, your Neo, right? Bayonetta probably falls into this category, the Ninja Gaiden kinds of games.
Yep.
I think that these are, from my personal perspective, these are the kinds of games, maybe opposite to what you would think, Aaron, are the games where I look at it and I say, I don't have the time or the patience for this. Now, the funny part is, of those games I just mentioned, I have Dark Souls, I have Dark Souls 3, I have Bloodborne, I have Neo, I have Bayonetta, I have Ninja Gaiden. I haven't played any of them in, a long, long time. And like Neo and games like that, the newer ones I haven't touched yet. I haven't brought myself to the point where I feel like I can play them, because they are so hard and they command so much attention at all times. And I've seen people on Twitch where, they play for hours trying to beat their head against this boss. And these are exceptional players with all the time in the world. And here I am, the lowly BCG who might have 30, 40 minutes, right?
2 hours every once in a while.
I can't take the next 6 months to beat this boss.
It's funny because I do think that we're at the opposite ends of the spectrum in a certain regard, because for whatever reason, this is a genre that I seem more willing to beat my head against a wall with. I own literally every game that we just named. I own every Dark Souls game. I actually just bought Dark Souls 3, the special edition, last week. Haven't played it once yet, but this is life and this is how it goes. But I own all these games, and I always have the same problem where I know that if I put them down midway through, that the difficulty of getting back in is going to be extreme. And I'm just going to want to start a fresh playthrough and scale up and get back to where I was. I have a Demon Souls save that is right near the end that I had to put it down for whatever reason. And I just keep telling myself, if you go back into this game, you're going to get destroyed. Your build may have not even been that good anyway, so why don't you just start over? And so I always have this fear of jumping back in. But I will tell you, one of the things that I learned to do very early on, and it was tough to swallow, and I started playing these games at a point in time where I did have more time. But now when I go back, the biggest piece of advice I give to people is don't be afraid to wear the pink scarf. Now, for those of you who know the reference, in Ninja Gaiden, when you lost so many times, it would give you the option to put it on easy mode. I think it was like 10 deaths or something. But it would make you wear this pink scarf for the rest of the game as a show that, hey, bruh, you suck at this game.
Right,
and just like maybe you need a visual reminder of how weak you are. And it's something that at first that bothered me so much, and you laugh at it, you say, gosh, who would do that? But then you realize, like,
gamer, I
just want to play the game, and maybe I need to do that. And in most cases, in a lot of these games, I think Bayonetta is a good example where you can start on an easy difficulty, but because it has New Game Plus replayability, even if, let's say, the first playthrough when you didn't have all the weapons or all the power-ups, it was a little bit too hard to step it up to that next difficulty, well, maybe the next playthrough, you can step it up to normal difficulty, and you can have a good experience, and you can tune it a little bit better. Now, not all the Dark Souls games have this. I mean, they kind of have customized difficulty based on the class you select and based on how you approach the levels. But I do feel like one of the things that I definitely do with the Dark Souls games is I absolutely have a guide with me at all times. And some people say, oh my gosh, you're ruining the difficulty. Like, you're ruining the exploration. I say, okay, I understand, but what I will do is I will play through the game on my own, but literally the minute I feel any sense of frustration whatsoever, where I feel like maybe I'm just doing it wrong, I just look at a guide. And I've just told myself, the fun in the game for me at this point is not the discovery of beating my head against the wall and finally uncovering the secret. It's being in the world. It's discovering new bosses. It's seeing the environments. That's really what I'm looking for. And in a lot of the character action games, just seeing the stylish move sets and things like that. So I've just kind of learned to take something different away, and I'm willing to kind of put it on noob mode or read a guide and ruin it for myself just to get that more full experience.
I think that is a very, very important point. And I think that's something that we don't say enough in the podcast, and gamers don't tell each other enough that it's okay to play a game for the story, and it's okay. There are many people out there who want to say that I've beaten every game on hard mode, and and that's great. Great for them. That's awesome. They've done many better things than we'll have done, but you're right. I mean, in the end, this is a form of entertainment, and we've talked about it before. Games that really upset you really are games you probably shouldn't be playing, or you should find ways to play them differently. And while I've never considered playing like Dark Souls like that with a guide, maybe I should. Well, I'll tell you, when we talked about Nier Automata, it has been known to be a challenging game, and I'm playing that game, or I played that game on easy. Just because, I heard there was an interesting story and I really wanted to play it, and I didn't want to get impeded by that. Now, the funny thing about it is, and I'm not saying Nier, but other games you might play, to your point, you might play it on easy, and then you're compelled to go back and maybe take the next step, right? Play it on harder mode or whatever it might be, and see if you can challenge yourself now that you're more familiar with the mechanics, you're more familiar with whatever. You're playing it less for the story. And the cool part about that is you might beat your head against the wall with a boss, but it's not like I'm trying to beat this boss so I can finally finish this game and understand how the story completes. It's more along the lines of the goal here is really to beat the boss. And once I beat the boss, that's awesome. I can decide if I want to continue on after that. And maybe you don't.
And I would say so many of these games, for people who have played them, not all of them, but I would say many of these games, even if, let's say, the strategy, right? You say, okay, I know this is how I'm supposed to approach this boss, or here is an exploit of some sort. A lot of these games, there's still the matter of having to execute. So even if somebody tells you or shows you a video, there's a twitchy aspect to it where you have to actually be able to do the maneuvers. And I do think that's half the fun, is replicating, even if you know the path, trying to make that happen on the screen and have the reaction time or roll at the right time or whatever the case may be. I still think that there's enjoyment in that, even if you feel like you have somebody coaching you along the entire time. And to me, I feel like so much of what people, especially with the Souls games, you have so many people that when they approach those games, people who are really into the series, they play through multiple times with all different character types. They do the multiplayer where they're dueling with people or they're invading other people's worlds. They know these bosses inside and out, and they know everything about the worlds. But that requires a day in, day out commitment to really have that level of memorization, because the games are hard enough where normal enemies can just totally destroy you. And so if you have to know that, we've talked about kind of when we game on previous episodes, if you know I'm only going to be able to pick this up every Saturday and Sunday, let's say, the reality is you're going to forget level layouts or important details about where enemies spawn or what's hiding around the corner. You're going to forget some of those details. And so to me, just having that little extra edge to say, if I would have had the time to play this sequentially, like a player who is, who's broadcasting themselves on Twitch or whatnot, who's playing all the time, I would probably remember this. But I don't remember this, so I am going to pretend as if I had the time, and I'm going to give myself the credit that if I was playing this all the time, I would have figured this out. That's not where I am in my life right now, so I've just got to give myself that extra edge and pretend as if I were that person that had more time.
Yeah, okay, and one other thing I do want to bring up, and it's a little bit of a sore subject.
Yep.
You know where this is going, probably, Aaron. So this is one of my biggest gripes with these games, from this perspective of difficulty, is, and I brought this up with Metal Gear Solid 5, like well over a year ago, is that I feel like some of these bosses, you're right, they're very twitchy, right? So it's like you learn a pattern in a boss, and whenever he does shift this way with his leg, then you need to be able to dodge his right arm, whatever it might be. And so you learn these things, and that's fine. I get that. But I feel like some of the challenge there is not memorization. It's not understanding that when this happens, you react this way, or these little small tells that get you to react in a certain way, right? It's not that. It's the fact that in order to beat the boss, you have to chain together, 200 of these perfect maneuvers, and at that point is the game, the boss, the beating the boss can be distilled down into, observe something, react the right way. Observe something, react the right way. Kind of like a Simon game or whatever, right? Yeah. And you have to get it right every time, and it takes you 10 or 15 minutes, and then eventually beat the boss. Now, to some people, that's really fun. To me, intellectually, I'm actually angry by it. I'm like, I don't want you. If you give me a lot of different things to figure out and to more complex things, that's interesting. That's great. I told you before with Metal Gear Solid 5, I don't like bosses that are by definition 10 minutes long.
Right.
I like bosses that if I do it the right way perfectly, I can beat them in 30 seconds. If I do it the wrong way slowly, I can beat them in 10 minutes. But if I want to play it really conservative, and that 10 minutes is fine for me because I understand I'm taking the time and I'm playing it the way I want to play it.
To me, it's like the Mega Man argument, right? If you play any Mega Man boss, if you spend time using the Mega Buster, you can beat any boss in the game, right? You can do it. Now, it may not be easy, and you may have to have a lot of twitchy moves to be able to survive. But, then you find, the wood shield beats Airman. Okay, well, great. Now it hits him in 4 shots and he's dead.
Right.
And it gives you that little extra edge where it was always possible, but you figured something out that allowed you to do it. Now, you still have to win. There's still an element, but to your point, you're like, okay, I solved the puzzle and I get paid off by not making this a total slog and something that is harder than it otherwise would need to be. That is something that I would say the Souls games in particular did a good job of, especially as they started branching the classes a little bit more, is that, okay, if you wanted to be a ranged build that used magic or used bow and arrow, okay, here's an approach that you would need to use to beat this particular boss. Some of those may be more effective, some may be less effective, but there was always a way with whatever class that you picked. It was just a question of adapting your play style to defeat that boss. And that was something I felt that having done a couple of playthroughs of these games, I always felt they did well, even though sometimes it was harder. That I felt like, this playthrough, it was way easier than it was this time. I didn't ever feel invalidated in my choice that I clearly did it wrong, and so I've hit a brick wall now. And I think that's a fine line that some games, they don't necessarily get right, but I do think the best games will at least, with some practice and with some, again, a helping hand at times, you can crack the code that will allow you to proceed with maybe not ease, but with at least making it possible for the average gamer to do.
Right. I just dislike the artificial marathons in a sense, right? Like we talked about the way back when we talked about, it was Final Fantasy X where you had to dodge 10,000 lightning strikes or whatever it was. A lot of people will say that's not hard, but it's just the fact, just for me, it's just the principle of the thing. To me, it's not fun. You're right. I would much rather go defeat one of every enemy in the entire game or something like that I can slowly, that's less of a, just a time check. Like, did you spend enough time in this particular thing, doing this particular thing, or this particular action or whatever, and did you get it right a million times in a row to get this action? So that's something that I wanted to get off my chest. It's
totally agree. I very much agree. So, Chris, let's talk about another genre that we go all the way back with, and that is the fighting game genre. So we are fresh off of Evolution wrapping up, and we spent some time watching coverage of that. I love the Evolution tournament. It is how I live vicariously through players that I will never emulate because they spend so much more time and are just way better at all things fighting games than I am. And it literally all fighting. It's like I watch every single fighting game, and I just tell myself, this game looks cool and this game looks cool. And even if I was able to get over my game ADD and actually focus enough on one of them, I still wouldn't be as good as that guy.
Yeah.
You know, that is something that I struggle with all the time. And that tournament, it's like a blessing and a curse because I watch it and it just rekindles all that love for the genre. But then there's just this crushing defeat knowing that I will never, ever get to that level. And you almost feel like, well, why even try that? How do you feel about this one, Chris?
Yeah, so for me, I used to be very competitive a long time ago. Aaron knows this. We used to have many Street Fighter
I've seen a thrown controller or two. I can't lie.
Maybe once, maybe twice, if we're pushing it. There's a reason why one of my Super Nintendo controllers has like a little a shake, you rattle to it.
I was there. I was there for the rattle.
For that one. And that's that's the thing. I've taught myself over the years that it really doesn't matter to me. So honestly, I know there will always be people who will put more time into it. I know even if I put that much time into it, I still won't be quite as good as them. And I've gotten to the point where all I search for in these kinds of games is not to be dominating, but is to I don't want to be embarrassing in a sense. So I'd like to trade as many wins as I have losses,
right.
And that actually I kind of use that across the board with respect to these kinds of FPSs, they're competitive kinds of games as well. I love fighting games. I do. I mean, I used to we played all the Street Fighter games. We played Tekken. We played Mortal Kombat. All those kinds of things. What I like the most about these games, despite their difficulty, I mean, they can be as difficult as possible. I don't like games that artificially cheat.
Right.
I don't like things that, Street Fighter was notorious for this in earlier Street Fighters where, it might, like Guile's flash kick, right? It requires a player to hold down for 2 seconds and then up to be able to do the flash kick. Well, of course, Guile, the computer-controlled Guile, could do a flash kick at a moment's notice. And that's something that, in my mind, always felt a little bit frustrating. It felt like difficulty was being added into the game. And I know they might not have intended it that way, but you learn to play computer opponents differently than you learn to play real opponents. And that's a thing that I think it's a little bit of an artificial difficulty that goes into it. And I know, obviously, real players of these games don't play computers. They all play online. They all play human opponents and all of that. But for me, I do love the games. I really do. I don't play nearly as many as I would like to, largely because of the fact that I can't even get to the point where I'm 50-50 when I play some of these games, honestly.
Sure.
And I'm not going to go spend $50 on a game that I get online and I get creamed for like 6 hours in a row by people who just live and breathe fighting games. It's too niche for me.
Yeah, I'm kind of in much the same, but I will say, if you're a fighting game fan, there has never been a better time in gaming history to be a fan. I mean, honestly,
definitely.
I tell people who've been away and they look at it and they say, oh, who plays that stuff? Or people who are away from the hobby who played Street Fighter at some point, let's say. And I tell them, if you're a fighting game fan, you have never had it this good in your entire life. I mean, when you look at all the old franchises, Street Fighter's still as strong as it's ever been. Mm-hmm. You've got Tekken still being made. You've got Mortal Kombat. That's somewhat moved on a little bit.
Killer Instinct is back.
Yeah, Killer Instinct. But you have new stuff. You have Injustice. You have all the Arc System Works games. You
Primal
have
Rage.
Smash Brothers.
Wait.
Oh God! Primal Rage, Clay Fighter, all of the bad ones.
Oh yes.
Eternal what was it? Eternal Warriors, the Genesis one
so.
that required you to have more buttons than the controller.
That's
had?
right.
Oh, gosh.
It was
or
awful.
Eternal Champions.
Eternal Champions.
But it's a great time to be a fan. One of the things that I've really had to do, and I'll give Arc System Works a ton of credit. They have put very deep story modes in their games, and really excellent. I think even if you like the source matter or not, I think just the production value is something that most people can appreciate. Mm-hmm. And to your point, I think having that computer-controlled opponent to say, all right, I can change the difficulty. Maybe it's hard. Maybe it does some cheap stuff. But it's certainly not going to be somebody that I'm going to meet in a lobby that is going to stomp me to oblivion. Mm-hmm. And that's something that you feel even when you win, you have this sense of progress. Say, okay, I made it to the next story checkpoint. I've learned something new about this character. It gives you a way to play all of the characters and gives you a reason to play through multiple times. So for me, the two biggest fighting game franchises over the past 5 or so years have really been the Persona fighting game series and BlazBlue. And both of them, the biggest thing they have in common is the deep story mode, and that just is something that really helps keep me going through the game and motivates me. It gives you that little incentive to say, I've got a little story nugget right around the corner, and it allows me to feel like I'm frankly better than I actually am at the game because I'm not really good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what I like about some of these things is I think over time a lot of the games have, certainly Street Fighter's done this, and they put more of those kind of helper, those aids, those tutorial modes, those learn the move modes into the game to help it make it more accessible, I think. But, I think the other thing that really does matter about this is there are many games that are, like you mentioned, Evo, a lot of the games that are played in those scenarios, the more, I hesitate to say e-sporty kinds of areas, but those things where the games are built for professional online, tournaments, and they're tweaked and they are polished to those levels. That's a very different level of a game than one like a Primal Rage, which was clearly meant to just, I don't know what it was
straight arcade
for,
mode. Yeah, it's
straight arcade. Yeah, arguably. But games that can do both. There are very few that can do both. Honestly, Street Fighter gets pretty close there in its latest iterations. But the nuance involved in a lot of these things where people can play at very high echelons of skill versus low echelons of skill is great. And in that case, you might not necessarily categorize it as a hard game per se, but certainly as you move into the more advanced tiers, you get to the point where it is quite challenging, to say the least.
So let's talk about the last genre we wanted to cover, and that's one that we've actually assigned Chris on more than one occasion, or we've assigned on this show, and that's roguelikes.
Yeah.
And so, Chris, you recently played, I think the most recent example that we paired you with was Enter the Gungeon. And so you've given some of your thoughts on this, but talk me through, how do you approach the genre that is actively trying to kill you and respawn you with nothing, to literally erase every shred of progress you may have made?
How do you really feel about it, Aaron? How do you really feel? Okay.
I know you are a progress-oriented gamer, and so this is one where it is tough to feel that you are making progress at times.
Yeah, and it's hard. So real quick background on it. So we talked about, you mentioned Enter the Gungeon. These are other games like Spelunky, Darkest Dungeon, I think qualifies. Dead Cells is actually probably the more recent one that I played. The Binding of Isaac is another one. Traditional roguelikes are games that they can be beaten relatively quickly. They have either one life or they have one hit or something like that. And many of them have, power-ups you can gain that are random. They're also characterized in not definitively, but many of them have, procedurally generated levels and things of that nature. I said that these games have to be hard to be relevant in a sense, because if they were easy, we'd blow through them in 10 minutes and you'd wonder why you bought the game.
Yeah, you never play it again.
Yeah, and you never play it again. So I think that, I respect their challenge. I spent some time reading a book by the gentleman who made Spelunky, and it was really interesting. He spent a lot of time talking about how he designed that game in particular. Now, he set out to make this game extremely challenging, right? And just to kind of paraphrase what I took out of this, I encourage you to read the books, read more about it if you're interested. But really, he focused on trying to make the game. He knew that there were going to be some subset of players he was going to frustrate. Period. Right? They're just going to find it too hard. They're not going to like it. But there's another group of players who love challenge, love these kinds of roguelike type, mechanisms. And they want to play this game, and they will get up to the point where they'll put in a lot of effort. They'll play things that are extremely hard, and they'll get a little bit frustrated, but not frustrated enough to stop the game. But in the end, they're going to be validated, and they're going to be happy by the challenge when they do beat the game. They'll feel like they've actually accomplished something. And I think he describes this kind of a razor's edge that he's trying to build this game and tune this game around, because you want it to be, maybe 25% of the players, 30% of the players are just going to hate its guts because it's so hard. Then you've got those challenge players who you can take as high as possible. They can be so frustrated that they're just about to quit, but they won't, right? And then in the end, when they beat the game, they're going to look back and say, no, that was a challenge. And they are so happy that they did that. And so tuning these kinds of games, I can see why they have to do that. For me as a player, I mentioned it when I played Enter the Gungeon. I like Enter the Gungeon. I love everything about that game, but I still find it immensely frustrating to play. And a lot of these games are kind of like that. Honestly, Binding of Isaac is the only one that I've really played substantially. I've beaten many, many times. And, I kind of feel like I keep going back to them because I want to be... I like the mechanics. I like the settings. I like everything, the characters in these games. But I can't quite bring myself to absolutely love, every iteration of every game.
Yeah, this is a genre that I struggle with a little bit. I think the big differentiator for me is something I always refer to as kind of the Dragon Quest effect. So for those of you who've played Dragon Quest, when you died, it would take half your gold, but it'd leave you with something, and a lot of times your experience would stay. I totally agree with you that if you basically make it to where you can respawn quickly or there's no severe penalty, then basically you're going to burn through these games and there's no challenge and there's not a lot of game there, and people just sell it back and trade it in and the game fails. But I do think that there is room for, the way I would analogize it is, every time you die or make it to some checkpoint or make some progress, raise the floor a little bit to say, when I respawn and when I try again, I maybe am in a slightly better position than I was when I first started, to where even if progress is really slow and I feel like it's almost inconsequential, that I feel like I am making some little bit of progress. And I think that's something where, when that's not there and I just get completely wiped and it says, nope, wipe the slate clean, you suck at the game, get better, or you don't proceed. That's where I tend to just realize my own limits and to know that in a lot of cases, I'm just not going to have the time to really make the progress that I want to. And so a lot of times I do find myself giving up with those. But I feel like if there is at least a minimum level of progression, to your point, with the Spelunky example, if the developer is saying, I want it to be hard, but I want to pull you back at just the point where you were going to quit, to say, hey, I can do this. I'm going to try it again. Let me give it one more go. That's kind of what I'm looking for out of games. If I don't feel like there's any invitation to get back in, and that there's something that's going to allow me to maybe have a better experience the next playtime, a lot of times I find myself just walking away.
Yeah, I feel like most modern roguelikes do have that piece in there, right? So Gungeon is a good example, where you play the game, you might get wiped, but, you found that extra item that you had never seen before, and now that's a candidate to drop next run. Dead Cells, we talked about that when I played it. You go through and you find a sword, or you find a whip, or you find some weapon or some, item that you found super useful for a while, and even though you died really quickly, you knew that weapon or that item could appear next iteration. So you're almost a little bit excited about being able to play again, and the chance that you might see that item or weapon earlier on in the game, and you might be able to leverage it to get further this time because of that.
Right.
So I think that the people who make these kinds of games they're not, masochists. They're not trying to make you feel pain in many senses. They have to, by definition, kind of make the game challenging. But like I said, because a lot of these games are kind of randomly generated, and there are limitations to how large and how complex and how much story can go into those games, they have to rely on other pieces of mechanics and other methodologies to help make that game, being compelling. And I think that's where, we're kind of seeing... I'd say that many more games like the ones we've talked about already are going to stagnate this particular genre in a sense, and it'll just be unnecessary, pain and suffering, unnecessary challenge for a game for not really getting something new out of it. But I would say the next step for this one are for developers to find new ways to make it fresh.
Yeah.
And once that occurs, I think we can probably continue to move that one forward. But, for now, it's a little bit of a mixed bag.
So we'd love to hear from you, the audience. What do you think? What are the other genres that maybe we didn't cover? Some hard games that either you enjoy or you've once enjoyed, but found that you're having to kind of take a different approach now that you're living that business casual gamer lifestyle that we so often describe. So we're going to transition and have Chris talk about something that, from everything I've heard, could be welcomed into that company of hard games, and that is Nier Automata. So Chris, I know this game has, maybe for those not familiar, this game has quite the pedigree in terms of the developer. I mean, this is coming from a character action studio that has made some of the biggest hits that are out there. And so I honestly, when you told me you were playing it, I remember the first time I saw it released, I saw review scores. I was very excited, but I already have a ridiculous backlog of games. So when you said, hey, I'm picking this up and want to play it, my expectations are really, really high and very hopeful. So, Chris, what did you think?
Buy this game. Show's over. See you
Okay,
guys.
we're done here.
Oh,
Now, wait.
Wait.
I have a very important follow-on question because the qualifier you put is buy the game. Now, Chris, would you be willing to plop down? I don't know if it's a pre-order, but they're supposedly coming back in stock. I think there is it's like a $250 Hotness Special Edition that is on the Square Enix website. Would you go deep enough to order that, Chris? Because I kind of got it. Sending me an email whenever that's available.
I don't know. I'm not the kind of person to go buy the $250 Hotness. I'd buy the $80 Hotness. Okay. I don't know if I'd buy the $250 Hotness. And
I do, Chris.
And I know. So, I mean, here's the thing, right? Like, I'd buy that. No game. The only game I'd spend $250 on maybe is like a new Legend of Zelda. But other than that, nothing's going to get me to do that. So, maybe it's an unfair question. But
so I heard yes out of that.
Sure.
I heard definitely yes for me.
I heard, wait, what's that?
No for you, yes for me.
I heard the audience just say
Okay.
yes. So I think you definitely should buy two of them just to make sure that one stays nice and pristine.
Good discussion.
So this game is really interesting. I'll preface this by saying, like I mentioned before, I played this on easy. So I'm not going to even discuss challenge whatsoever. And so I know there are some pieces where people say it's a really hard game. And I think that they code the game slightly such that you can you get a little bit of gimmies here or there that you wouldn't normally get. But let's talk a little about how this game goes. So the cool thing about this game is it is very unique and I think a compelling action RPG, right? And the funny thing about it is, and I don't know if you played any sort of Nier games or the Drakengard or whatever the previous games were called, you might be used to these kinds of pieces, but the game combines a third-person perspective sometimes, a top-down perspective sometimes, a side-scrolling perspective sometimes, throughout the entire experience. You could experience all three of those. In fact, you do very beginning of the game. You experience all of those in somewhat rapid succession. And it can happen at any point as you're playing through the game. And that's one of the things that's just, it might seem like a parlor trick in a sense, but it is so neat to see how the game transitions between the 3D, full movement, full camera movement to a 2D side-scroller kind of, or a 2.5D kind of side-scroller piece across the board. And that's really fun to play. You don't expect it. And then every once in a while they're like, bam, this is a shooter. Here's a shmup. Here's some pieces with this kind of, it's not like the shmups we talked about previously in the episode, but it certainly has a lot of these kinds of interesting things. So one thing I'll mention is the game is designed to be beaten many, many times.
Right.
And this is not your traditional, and I don't want to give anything away, but it's not your traditional beat it plus new game plus, new game plus plus, new game plus 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 or whatever. I would recommend you beat the game. I think it's at least 3 times. The way I understand it is the first two iterations of the game are somewhat close to one another. You see slightly different perspectives. You see slightly different sides of the story. The third time you play the game is completely different.
Okay.
And I think there are even more mechanisms to play more parts of this game. And some of the criticism the game got early on was that people played the first game, the first iteration of the game, first playthrough, and they said it didn't quite do it for them. They felt like it didn't really end, and then whatever, complaints here, complaints there, complaints there. And what they really didn't get was that this particular development team, the director and these kinds of folks are notorious for putting in these you have to play this multiple times kind of thing that is just pretty critical to understanding the game as a whole. And to kind of extend this, I don't think it's a spoiler necessarily to say that there are lots and lots of endings to this game. One ending you can get in under maybe I think 5-6 minutes.
Oh wow!
And so here's a funny part, right? So you and again, if you're really sensitive to spoilers, you can skip ahead. But I really don't think this is a spoiler. In the intro section of the game, you have this first part of the game where they kind of teach you how to play and through various pieces. And if you were to die in that little intro section, the game immediately rolls credits in like 2 seconds, like as fast as you can.
Oh, that's great.
As fast as you can, and then it goes back to the title screen.
I really
and you're
appreciate
like,
that.
what just happened?
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, you get an achievement too. It's like, yay, you beat the game, but you failed.
You
miserably.
failed, yeah.
And so and all that kind of ties into the story. So it's really kind of a witty way to piece it together. The story I found was really interesting, and admittedly, I haven't gotten all the way through the multiple story iterations, and I want to though. It's your typical post-apocalyptic world. You've got this notion of humans were on Earth many years ago, or thousands of years ago. Aliens attacked. They forced the humans to flee into outer space and to the moon, and in fact, and in order to counter these aliens are there, they build these machines to take over the world and to kind of keep humans at bay. The humans come through and build these androids called the Yorha, which you probably have heard before if you played earlier versions of these kinds of games. And those androids are deployed down from a space station called the Bunker to basically wipe out those machines. And that is the premise of your story here. You play characters, a couple of different characters. You play as a character called 2B, which is an android unit, 2B, and then you have 9S, which is another unit, which is more of a reconnaissance android. 2B, I should mention, is a little bit more of like a destruction kind of, like get business done kind of android. And so the cool part about it is, they are androids, admittedly, but they have very interesting programming in a sense. And so 2B and 9S communicate with one another back and forth quite a bit throughout the game. And, it's their dialogue back and forth that actually becomes really fun because, 9S is a little bit more, being the recon bot, is a little bit more asking questions. And, 2B is very to the point, emotionless, logic kinds of things. And they play off of one another quite a bit in the game. And the cool part about how it kind of progresses the story, and I'm certainly not going to give any spoilers here, but the story progresses in many different ways, and I think they've done a really good job at unleashing little pieces of information just to keep the player, and admittedly through the two characters kind of conversing back and forth, we're not sure what's going on.
Right.
There's something happening. You think you understand what you're doing here. You know what you're ordered to do, and you start questioning, like, why is this happening, or what's going on here? This doesn't jive here, or whatever. And the kind of same questions you're kind of asking yourself as a player are the same questions that 9S and 2B are asking themselves and kind of weighing on themselves as they move forward. And you get a little bit of a chance to play slightly differently in a sense, not necessarily like a choose-your-own-adventure story, but they give you the opportunity to behave slightly differently in some areas where you might want to steer one direction versus another. And so I think all of that together is really an interesting plot line, interesting story. The controls are really strong and good in the back of the game, right? There's your typical double jump. There's a hover. There are dodges. There are light and small light attack. There are strong and light attack kinds of things, or secondary and primary attacks. Really, all the key kind of things you would have in a Bayonetta. So, if you played Bayonetta before and you like the interactions with the shooting and some of the more, I guess, physical attacks, you're going to enjoy that piece. The other thing is that I'll mention, aside from the transitions from 2D to 3D, which is just so freaking cool, is that they distilled a lot of the RPG elements into the game in unique ways. So, like any other RPG, you have levels, you have HP, you have items, you have weapons, you have gear, you have all those kinds of things. What I found funny about it is the game it doesn't really break the fourth wall that I can tell. When you're playing 2B, the android, you turn on the game, and it shows the booting screen. And the booting screen is actually 2B booting up, getting ready to play. And when you die, when you transport in various ways throughout the level, it always does that booting piece. So it's already kind of getting you into this mindset that you're this android. Now the gear part, aside from the weapons and stuff, I don't really need to talk about that. They're cool weapons, you can upgrade them, you can do all sorts of fun stuff there. The gear stuff is neat. It's not like you have slots you have a chest slot, you have a head slot, you have those kinds of armor or gear kinds of slots. Instead, you're an Android. You have memory slots. So you have X amount of memory, and you have the items you gain, whether they are power items or they're kind of user interface items or whatever, they all have to fit into specific slots in memory. And when you run out of slots in memory, you can't add any more.
Okay.
I think I love this piece. Maybe this is because I'm a computer kind of guy, but you have these chips in your memory that are there by default that just keep your Android running. So you look at the description of one of them, and it's like, if you remove this, you die. Your operating system is gone, and the Android falls over.
You stay. You make
so
the
you're going to keep that piece. But you have other things. It leads you to this interesting trade-off where, as an example, there's one piece of gear that you can put in that will help you see your experience bar, which you normally can't see in the heads-up display. There are some that might help you see life of enemies, things that are not necessary but might help you. The experience bar might be interesting because you spend a lot of time at lower levels of life, and when you gain a level, you get a free replenishment of your life. And so
you can
knowing when that's coming, is very important. So I might opt to do that, but I take a memory slot to do that. And that also means by adding that UI element, which isn't necessarily required, I'm going to prevent myself from doing something that might give me more attack bonus or something other bonus or whatever.
Something that actually changes the game.
That actually changes the game. And so that's it. I find it very interesting. It seems to be, I haven't gotten to the point where I feel like I have like 10 things over here I really want and 10 things over here I really want, and I can't make them mix. The decisions have not been challenging necessarily, but there have been decisions where like, I do like having this tracker on my UI, so I'm okay, not taking this particular power up because I just want to have the ease of having this in the HUD. That's really, really cool. I've never seen that before in a game.
That's really innovative. So one of the things that I really want to know, so again, I mentioned or I alluded to it briefly, but this is a game that's made by Platinum Games. So this is the maker of Bayonetta, Metal Gear Rising Revengeance, Vanquish. These are some of the top character action games ever. And so I came into this expecting, I'd heard a lot of things about kind of, genre clashing or doing different things. For somebody that's coming into this that loves Platinum's character action games and they're saying, I just want the next Bayonetta or I want this. How does it stack up? If you look at the standalone character action elements, does it feel like it's up to the test of those games? Does it feel like, if you just had to stand on its own, maybe it's not quite as strong as those? If somebody just wanted that element and the other parts are just kind of a side thing, is there enough there?
I felt like it has that. Now, I am, I like Bayonetta. I don't think I like it as much as you like Bayonetta. I know there's some over-the-top pieces of Bayonetta where, she uses her hair and all these kind of crazy little things.
It's all kinds of Japanese weird.
Yeah, to end enemies' lives and all this kind of stuff. I don't think it has that. What it does have is, and one of the things I'll talk about in a moment is the musical score. It has the intensity that you have. You can be as intense as you like. There are certain areas where the adrenaline is pumping, the music is going at an appropriate level to keep you pumped up. There are enemies coming. There's lots on the screen going on. You're either you can either choose to hang back and kind of take it slow, or you can be more Bayonetta style, just like go guns blazing, just run in there and just like go crazy on stuff. You can do that too, and you can be very successful either way. And in fact, the game lets you. It lets you kind of pick your style, whether you're more offensive, defensive, or more middle. And I haven't played with a lot of that necessarily, but it does try to gear you, and it does some auto customization if you'd like it to help get you to a point where if I'm just going to go guns blazing into this battle, like straight up, point blank with people and just start cutting people down with katana, right? I can do that.
Yeah.
And I think, like I said, I don't know if it's quite as absolutely crazy and over the top intense as a Bayonetta. But because it does have some slow moments where they want to progress the story, where you go to like quest hubs and you get quests and you go out into the world and you find some items and things like that. They're a little bit more fetchy. Some people might think that's a downer, but I think that those pieces are, some of them aren't optional, but most of them are. And those pieces are kind of few and far between, at least across the when you have a large story arc to go after. And so I've always wanted to go into the story. When I've gotten into that story piece, I've been really excited to push through it.
So of the modes, you mentioned a lot of different options. What is your favorite of the different gameplay modes that are out there, having played through a lot of what sounds like a lot of different styles of games?
As far as like the 2D or the 3D stuff,
which one did you find yourself looking forward to getting back to the most?
It's a hard question. I think that they're all interwoven in really interesting ways. So I'm never like yearning for a shmup piece, but when I get it, I'm like, oh cool, I'm gonna be in a flying mech right now, and we're gonna have a little shmup stuff. That's kind of cool. The side-scroller stuff is interesting, too. I like the 3D, the full 3D, a little bit better because I have a lot more movement freedom. I can go certain places. The 2D stuff is, admittedly, there are just constraints that you have to adhere to when you're moving left or right or up or down or whatever it is. But they weave in so nicely, and I think that they do it. There are certain points in the progression where they force you into a 2D just to give you a little bit of an interesting or different way, just to kind of break up how you're fighting.
Sure.
Like you might fight 15 enemies in 3D, and then instead of giving you 15 more enemies in 3D, they're gonna swap you into 2.5D, and you're gonna be running from left to right, and enemies are coming top, bottom, all these places, and you have to figure out how to maneuver through them this way, and it kind of forces you to not get into this grind of I'm just gonna run into these enemies, slam this button, dodge a little bit, and win. Now I have to think about how I do it in a different type of dimension, and the way that the game so seamlessly moves you in and out of those dimensions, it's not jarring at all. You notice it clearly, but it's not jarring. It doesn't break your immersion. It doesn't make you think like, oh my god, another 2.5D section. I just don't want to do this. It's just, I think it's done really well.
Yeah. One last question I have, I think, so this game's done well. I mean, it's not Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty seller, but it is sold well. And it is certainly, I think, from a critical standpoint, it's gotten a lot of recognition. It's one of the top-rated PlayStation 4 games out there. So I do believe this game will get another shot or a sequel. Is there anything that you'd like to see added, or is there anything you'd like to subtract if they were to redo and say, okay, we're going to give you another shot at this? What do you want to see added or taken away? What's the most important thing that if you, Chris, could be the designer, where would you steer us as the development team?
Oh man, that's a hard one. I have to say that I'm kind of speaking out of both sides of my mouth when I say this, because I like the uniqueness and the interestingness of you have to beat it multiple times to get through. And I understand this is kind of like the telltale sign. This is like a signature of this particular development team. But I kind of think that turned a lot of people off.
Yeah.
That frustrated a lot of people. For me, it's kind of hard because I look at, I'll admit, I look at time to beat games. So I play the game. I look at how long is it going to how long am I going to be able to beat this game? Or how long will it take me to beat this game? And then I think, okay, I'm going to have to do this 3 times, and I'll get maybe a little bit better each time, but this is going to be an X 10, 20, 30, 40, 50-hour investment over time. And, I kind of start thinking, it's going to be hard. It'll be a hard slog for me to play this 2 more times, even if it is that new, but I really want to understand the full story. I feel compelled to listen and play this game. It's a double-edged sword for me. I'll tell you, I'm probably not going to beat it the 3rd time. I probably won't. I probably won't make it all the way through the 2nd time, but I really want to. It's just, as a business casual gamer, I think that's hard for me to do. I have a stack of other games, to your point. Lots of games on my stack here that I want to get to. And, maybe I'll get to it one day. Maybe, over a big break I'll do it. But that's my one big complaint with it, in that I just feel like I won't lie, I'm partially compelled to just beat the game once and play a little bit of the 2nd just to get a feel for it, and then go read up as
watch
to how
it
goes. I might end up doing that, and I feel dirty saying that, because it's not like the games we talked about before where you're just like, forget this, I just want to see how it ends. I really do want to. In a perfect world, I would take the time to go all the way through it. I'd take the time to 100% it. I'd take the time to do this, because I feel like the game deserves it, and I'd love to see the story, and I want to put the time into it. I just don't have it.
But like you said, we've talked about it. Do we finish games on a past episode? And most people don't finish games.
Right.
And so the developer setting the expectation at, well, you need to finish it 3 times, when you're already starting with a population that does not finish games,
Right.
asking them to do something 3 times over that they're already not doing is a tall order. And so that I think that's great feedback, and I'm sure that if there have been multiple players who have given this feedback, it's kind of like once the novelty wears off to say, hey, are they just going to do the multiple playthrough thing again? That may give them some ammunition to say maybe we need to rethink this, and maybe this could be an even bigger seller if we maybe asked less of the players in terms of number of raw playthroughs.
Yeah, and I hate to sound shallow, but if when you started the game, you hit start and it said choose your player, like player 1, prospective player 1, prospective player 2, or prospective player 3, or whatever it might be, for the first three playthroughs. Or if it somehow tried to interweave them together and make a game that's 3 times as long, that might have been perceived differently to me. Number one, I would have just said, oh, this is another one of those 40 or 50-hour games, like Final Fantasy 15, and I'd be like, I just don't know if I have the time for this. I'd still play it, but I'd just be one of those things where, okay, cool, I just understand that I'm not going to get the end of it for a while. But for this, like I said, both sides of my mouth. Part of me feels like it's okay. I beat the game once, but I didn't really beat the game. But the other side is I kind of just wished it was one big experience. And so, I don't know. I don't really know what I'm saying here, but I think that in the end, the game is super fun. I think you'll really like it, Aaron. I think a lot of the listeners will like the game. I really do encourage you to go pick it up. And if you don't want to pick it up now, you probably should look now, because I think it is. It's certainly getting cheaper. And if you can pick this thing up,
not if you're buying the edition I'm going for, Chris. It's only getting pricier.
None of us are Aaron, but if you can find it, $35, $40, it's certainly worth that price, I'd say.
Well, that's awesome. I'm really excited. I'm glad this game delivered. I'm glad Platinum has another hit on their hands. So, Chris, what have you got for me this week?
Okay, so considering we talked about, we technically assigned me, this game, and I played it a little bit, didn't quite get through it all, so I kind of punted on Nier, right? I think we're going to do the same thing for you. So we had a game that you kind of punted on a while back, if I'm not mistaken, right?
This is true.
And I understand that this is a particular game that, in some circumstances, if there wasn't a specific driving factor for either me or you playing the game, maybe we'll just let it go. But this one I think has a specific tie to a listener.
Yeah, I've been requested.
You've been requested, you've been called out, and, you haven't quite fulfilled that. And so I think we're going to have you come back to Sin and Punishment Star Successor for Wii.
Okay, I really want to play this game, and Steve, I'm going to do it right. I'm going to play the game that I committed to. I've got even more time, so I will come back and I will be ready to speak about the game that was so hard fought and battled over to get the sequel, and I won't let you down, listeners. This time I'm coming back. I will make the time.
So the question is, have we finally gone back to the tried and true Aaron hates the games he plays for his assignments?
I really hope
we'll
not.
See.
They had to work. I mean, granted, it is the Wii, so the waggle is real.
All good things have to come to an end. We know that. Aaron will eventually find something horrible
There's
to
always
talk
something
about,
to
a
hate.
soapbox to get on,
Always
if you will.
something to hate.
But yeah, so I really do hope you enjoyed the game, and I want to learn more about it. So we will make sure that you come back to it and give us a fair review of that down the road. And I think with that, we are going to bring this episode to a close. But before I do, I want to remind you, please take a look at businesscasualgamers.com. Check us out on that website. Please follow us on Twitter at BISCasualGamers. Check us out on our YouTube channel. Just search for Business Casual Gamers. You will find us there, or you can pull us off the website. And also, please take the time, wherever you get your podcasts, or if you get us on YouTube, subscribe, rate us there. Take the time to write us a review or to rate us on iTunes or Stitcher or Podchaser, whatever it is you use to find us. Really do appreciate it. Every little bit helps. It helps us get more folks listening, find more of us, and build our community. So we really do appreciate all of your efforts there, and we do realize it takes a little bit of extra time to go out of your way to do that. And we thank you for that. Of course, you can always give us more feedback along any of those lines and things we're doing well, things we're not doing well. Give us examples of games we want to play. We want to force Aaron to actually hate something again. We can certainly do that. And with that, we will bring episode 42 to a close.
See you soon.